Hi,
Hi.
I'm Andrew,
And I'm Jordan.
and this is our presentation,
We're going to talk about not only public diplomacy versus propaganda, but also,
Voice of America.
so this is our project.
So here we go.
Alright, so propaganda has been around since human activity has been recorded. It always emerges from literate and politically active societies informed by mass media. So in order to have propaganda in a society, there has to be some sort of mass media. And then the formal definition of propaganda is a form of communication aimed toward influencing the attitude of the community to a cause or position by presenting only one side of the argument. So propaganda is always one-sided. So some common tactics used during propaganda is selectivity, partial facts or historical context, reinforcing reasons and motivations, a narrow source of experts, demonizing the enemy who does not fit the picture of what is right, and also using a narrow range of discourse. So in both pictures that you see on this slide, these are examples of propaganda that Andrew will talk about.
Yeah, on the left is a picture promoting and glorifying this army and trying to encourage the distribution of iron in America, and uses positive heroic imagery. On the right, however, was a poster distributed during the Second World War, basically to demonize the Jewish population of Germany. As you can see, the curtains revealed to show this Jewish man with exaggerated features to villainize him, with the destruction of Germany below him at war. Basically, Kriegsanstifter means inciter of war, and Kriegsverlängerer is extender of war. So it's basically blaming the Jewish people on the war that happened 20 years before during World War I, but also blaming them on the current war at hand, basically justifying the persecution the Jewish people would later face in Germany.
So the picture on the right was used during World War II.
Yes. And so, public diplomacy. The first time it was used as a term was when it appeared in the London Times in 1856, and there was a quote regarded to President Franklin Pierce, basically criticizing his presidency as being too civil, using public diplomacy as the term. But the modern term itself was coined in 1965 by Professor Edmund Gullion, a professor at Tufts University. He basically created the term to replace propaganda, because propaganda as a term was getting a bad name and had negative connotations with it. And public diplomacy is defined as communication with foreign publics to establish a dialogue designed to inform and influence. And a country is able to, by informing and influencing foreign audiences, is able to promote their national interests. And it differs from traditional diplomacy by not only involving foreign governments and heads of state, but non-government organizations.
Such as Greenpeace or the European Union.
Yeah. So, public diplomacy in action. Listening and advocacy and dialogue are key components of public diplomacy, but you can also see it in cultural diplomacy, exchange diplomacy, such as the Fulbright program.
Also, international broadcasting is an example of public diplomacy, and the most notable example is Voice of America. Foreign policy, film, television, music, sports, video games, and other social, cultural activities can be known as public diplomacy. The most notable example of this is the Olympics.
Yeah, like every 2 years, winter or summer, the world is on a grand stage, and all these countries are able to display their culture, their identity, through the use of flags, song, and sports, and it's a great way to showcase the positive parts of their country.
Yeah. Also economics, that is another method for public diplomacy.
Yeah, you can see evidence of that in trade and that sort of thing. And then also public diplomacy can be criticized as a form of psychological warfare. So that. So, what's the difference?
What's the difference?
What's the difference? So, public diplomacy at its best is a truthful, factual display of one's own foreign policy. Basically, it's a positive image of one's own nation's culture. It encourages global understanding. Listening and engaging in dialogues are a key component of it, as said before, and public diplomacy is meant to be objective.
Propaganda at its worst, it spreads messages by force. It implements repetition and catchy slogans such as the Uncle Sam I Want You sign. It's very catchy and straightforward, and it tells you what their objective is. It typically demonizes the enemy while glorifying its own nation. Also, oversimplification is a key component of propaganda, so they won't tell you what the whole side of the story is. They'll just tell you why it's bad. And it will misrepresent the truth, or it will purposefully lie. And framing is a big component to propaganda. So they'll frame their argument in order to get their idea across to a certain audience.
So now we're going to switch cozies and talk about Voice of America. America. So, Jordan's going to start us off.
Yeah. So, just a couple things about Voice of America. It provides a wide range of programming outside of the U.S., and it's translated into 43 different languages. So it reaches a wide audience because it's translated into so many different languages. It's the official external broadcast institution of the U.S. government, so it is government-owned. 1,500 hours of news and programming per week, so that's a lot of time. And their statement says,
to promote freedom and democracy and to enhance understanding through multimedia communication of accurate, objective, and balanced news information and other programming about America and the world to audiences overseas.
Yep.
So some facts about Voice of America. It was founded in 1942. Last year they just celebrated their 70th anniversary. It was first broadcasted in the airwaves when the U.S. first got involved in the Second World War. It occurred in Germany. Its headquarters still today are in Washington, D.C. As said before, it's translated to 43 different languages and has a weekly audience of 134 million people across the world. And it's owned by the U.S. federal government, as we said, but it's funded entirely through U.S. taxpayers, aka you. And last year they had a budget of $207 million.
So influences and controversies regarding Voice of America. VOA has definitely influenced a large global audience because it reaches so many people. Like we said previously, it translates into 43 different languages, so a lot of people are watching Voice of America.
Yeah.
And they often spread American ideas. One example is jazz music. Typically, they will play jazz music in countries like
South Africa. Like all over the place, and jazz music is something unique to the United States, but through Voice of America, those sort of American ideals are played overseas, and sometimes those other cultures adopt our ideals.
Yeah, they also use a reliable two-source format, so if they are on the scene at something that is going on, there has to be one person there
in order to verify their story.
To verify what's going on. They're the first public-run station as opposed to a privately owned radio station, and they've inspired other stations like Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty.
With all this influence and impact, it's no surprise that there's controversies attached to Voice of America. Some say that Voice of America pay for their appearances sometimes. That came out recently to a lot of uproar. Some see Voice of America as a propaganda tool for the U.S. government. Some countries criticize it, saying it violates their national sovereignty by broadcasting in their country and goes against their laws. Some opponents of Voice of America have been known to airwave jam, meaning they block it from being transmitted to audiences. And they've had interviews with extremists and terrorists members, such as members of Al Qaeda, so some people aren't happy about that. So, in conclusion, the line between public diplomacy and propaganda can be thin.
Both are used in international affairs and relations. There's also the use of global media to help spread these ideas in order to influence, and Voice of America is just one example of this.
Yeah, and some people view Voice of America as a public diplomacy tool,
While
view
others would view it as a propaganda tool. And when dealing with such controversial
issues.
issues, it's important to practice media literacy.
And knowing media literacy is very important. That way you understand what's happening, so you can recognize that you're being influenced either by public diplomacy or propaganda. And global media impacts our daily lives through the use of these tactics, so it's good to be aware of these.
Yep.
So that's our project. We would ask for questions, but we're not there to answer them, so send us emails.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Have fun.
Yeah.